Welcome back, Mr. Goodberry. The First Star Logistics studio is fully equipped and ready to record.
Welcome back to Bengals on the Brain, presented by First Star Logistics. I'm your host, Joe Goodberry, and the Bengals have made a coaching hire, two hires actually, on the offensive line. And after Frank Pollack and the Bengals offensive line has been under scrutiny for a long time, let's start with Frank Pollack, I guess. A move had to be made for a multitude of reasons. Number one, the players the Bengals gave him did not develop under Frank Pollack. Number two, he was a wide zone coach, and the Bengals had to abandon the wide zone to become more of a shotgun passing team that had to run gap out of shotgun. So that wasn't his expertise. And the mesh, the fitment with Zac Taylor and Joe Burrow just wasn't there. Now, being the draft evaluator that I like to pretend to be in the offseason, the Bengals didn't give him a lot to work with. And these picks that they made weren't exactly the guys he wanted. So can you turn those players, can you turn the Jackson Carman into something he never had the ability to be? I don't blame Frank Pollack for that. I do blame the entire staff and the ownership for not finding a better coach to fit where this offense was heading. But the Bengals typically are reactive more than proactive. So Frank Pollack was fired in January after the season ended. And I was saying I want to look for a guy that can, maybe from college, that can fit this scheme a little bit better, that can marry the run game and the passing game a little bit better. And what that means is when you watch all of these teams, especially in the playoffs, right? You're watching the divisional round, all these teams running out of shotgun and running very, very well. You got to be able to find that. Clearly, it's out there. Clearly, it's a thing. Now, I will say that a lot of these teams have much more mobile quarterbacks than the Bengals have with Joe Burrow. Not that Burrow's some stiff back there, right? He's not Carson Palmer, but he's not running the option. You're not doing things like you don't want to. I don't want to get Joe Burrow hurt and hit. So I get that. But I do think there is a lot of offensive creativity left to be desired when it comes to the Bengals run game. And then we've got to get the players that they've drafted, mainly Amarius Mims, maybe Matt Lee, and then whoever they do draft down the line. Because let's be honest, if they took an offensive lineman in round one, would any of us be upset? I don't think so. And we're going to start our draft review very soon. I was planning on today until they made a signing yesterday, technically, when I'm recording this. I'm not going to start with offensive line. I'm going to start with defensive line, actually. But point remains, if they draft an offensive lineman in the first, second, or third round, no one's going to be upset about it and plug them in at guard. So we need this next coach to be able to develop them. Now I'll start with, clearly they hired at this point Scott Peters, who was a offensive line coach for the New England Patriots last year, but was developed under who I believe is the best offensive line coach in the league, and Bill Callahan, who is now coaching under his son, Brian Callahan, who we know with the Titans. And Bill was with the Browns for a lot of years. He was with Washington and the Dallas Cowboys and the Raiders too. And the Raiders in the early 2000s after John Gruden went to the Bucs, Callahan became the head coach there. So Callahan's got a lot of skins on the wall. He's a great offensive line coach and evaluator and developer. And he picked out Scott Peters as worthy to be an assistant. And why I say it like that is because of the background Peters has. He was an NFL offensive lineman, a guard and a center. Lower pedigree player, didn't have a long career, but he afterwards got into MMA and learned body mechanics and leverage and everything that's more cutting edge to the way NFL linemen used to be taught. Got really into hand technique and usage and hand usage and jujitsu and using your core and your lower body. And he started his own company, a offensive line development company. And the goal was to get these guys to think about playing offensive linemen a little bit differently and using their brain and using their hands and using their hips and lower body better. And because of it, legendary offensive line coach for the Bengals, Jim McNally, recommended Peters to Bill Callahan. And Bill Callahan was impressed and hired him as an assistant with him when he was with Washington, followed him to Cleveland, where he became the assistant offensive line coach there. And then Peters developing under Callahan, learning more of the X's and O's to the level that Callahan runs it. That's a good thing, right? And still developing his techniques and cutting edge stuff. And like I said, you don't see these leaps in NFL offensive line technique often. And even Jim McNally has gone on Twitter talking about this, that you don't see it too often. And Peters is one of the guys that has been on the forefront of this recently. That's fun. That's exciting, right? To have a guy that's going to try some new things, to bring new ideas, to try and get these guys to elevate their game. The Bengals could really use that. So when Gerard Mayo was hired last year for the New England Patriots head coaching job, Peters goes and gets the job with the Patriots. Now, this is where we got to look at both sides of everything. Peters and the Patriots offensive line last year was not good. One of the few offensive lines, if you look at PFF, that was worse than the Bengals in both run blocking and pass blocking. That does not give you a lot of confidence. And they drafted two offensive linemen that I wouldn't have touched. I'm talking guys that should have been 7th round picks. They spent 3rd and 4th round picks on them. That's scary. Now, how much was Peters involved in the drafting? We'll never know. But we can't have that. We can't have him drafting guys like that. You'll set this franchise back multiple years if you do that. If they say, hey, you can have a 3rd and 4th round pick to fill out your guard spots, and you do that, we're done. Zac Taylor's done. Everyone's done here. And so we gotta know what happened there. That would be one of my questions. If I was interviewing Peters, I'm like, all right, who made these picks? Who evaluated them? Because we can't. What'd you learn from that? If that was you, we got to know. On the other hand, the Patriots may have had the least talented offensive line in the entire league, and they dealt with a ton of injuries. They had over 12 guys play 60 snaps, so a game or more. The Bengals only had 8. So think about that. 4 more. We thought going down to Devin Cochran was a lot. Having to start Cody Ford, they were 4 guys deeper than that on their offensive line. Not ideal. They were playing Michael Jordan. Remember Michael Jordan? Yeah, that Michael Jordan. Not that Michael Jordan, but that Michael Jordan. He was playing and starting for the New England Patriots. Ben Brown. Do you remember Ben Brown? I've done film reviews on Ben Brown when he was with the Bengals. Remember Ole Miss got hurt. I think it was chest, pectoral, bicep. I think it was bicep preseason. But there was nothing really there. He pretty much started all year at center for the Patriots. Not a good situation. So when I look at it as a whole, I say, okay, you didn't have the required talent to be good. You also didn't have the time. If you're a technique coach that's on the cutting edge of things and wants to try new things and wants to implement them, it's going to take time to grasp that. It's going to take time for the players to fully embrace it. And if they're constantly getting hurt and it's new guys, you're never getting that to happen, right? So you got to give them time. I have my concerns because it does not look good on paper for his 1 year with the Patriots. But then the Patriots' entire staff was pretty much released other than the special teams coordinator. So maybe we give him a little bit of a pass there. Because I do like this. We're going to compare Frank Pollack and Scott Peters. Number one, Frank Pollack, the word coming out of Dallas when he was hired the first time with the Bengals was that he's not the technician. He's not going to teach guys technique to the level that some of these other offensive line coaches are, which hinders development, but he can get a unit to play together to execute at a high level. And I'm like, okay, you'll take that. Those are good things. Those are good qualities. If that's the 2 options to choose from, that's fine to take that. But the Bengals couldn't develop offensive linemen, as we saw. I mean, they spent premium picks. I've seen people say the Bengals don't spend picks on linemen like the Eagles do, as I'm watching the Eagles run for 200 yards again in the playoffs. And I'm like, that's not true. Billy Price, Jonah Williams in back-to-back years, Jackson Carman, Amarius Mims. I mean, they've spent these picks. They just haven't panned out. So we couldn't get them to develop. We also couldn't get players to play above expectation. That includes like Alex Kappa. First year, he looked exactly like Alex Kappa from Tampa Bay. Injuries happen. Maybe that sapped some of it, but never above expectation. Jonah Williams could never play above expectation. I would say the same for like Quentin Spain, Hakeem Adeniji, Isaiah Prince, the guys they had to plug in there. I would say the same for Orlando Brown Jr. He has not performed above expectation. He's been fine, especially as a pass protector. And he's especially this year before Orlando Brown got hurt, he looked good. But that's the expectation. Ted Karras has looked like Ted Karras, even having a career year, I think, this year. He didn't play above expectation. He looked like Ted Karras always did in the NFL. If you watch film from back when he was with the Patriots and Dolphins, that's what he looked like. Sometimes he had better pieces around him. Sometimes he had better coaching, better scheme, and he looked better or worse, but he looked like the same guy each time. Cordell Volson, you couldn't elevate him. You couldn't develop him. You couldn't get him to play above expectation. But you did get a lot of these bad players that I'm bad mouthing right now. You did get them to perform well enough to have a good offense. You did execute at times for the run game, for the pass game. So maybe Frank did get that out of him. And I think we come back now and we say, well, that wasn't good enough. Clearly it's not. The line was still an issue. I'm not saying it wasn't. I'm saying was still an issue. So now maybe we want to go in a different direction. Now maybe we want to go for the guy who teaches technique, to the guy who can elevate players. The one player that keeps coming up when reading stories and talking to people about Scott Peters is Wyatt Teller of the Cleveland Browns. Multi-time Pro Bowler with Cleveland, was a cast-off with the Bills. The Bills traded him for nothing. The Browns fixed his technique, put him in a great scheme. So one was the technique, sounds like Peters. Put him in the great scheme, Callahan. And off he went. Ends up being a great player. Can we create some of that magic? Recreate some of that? Can Peters do that? That would be huge for the Bengals to find some values on the offensive line. If anything, if you look over the last few years, they've got negative value on the offensive line. They paid premiums and paid a lot for guys like Orlando Brown, Ted Karras, Alex Kappa, Lael Collins, first-round picks, premium picks, Jackson Carman, Amarius Mims, and it's still not good enough. Once you pay Joe Burrow, and if you pay Jamar Chase, which we expect, and T. Higgins, which we should expect, you better find values at other positions. One of them mainly offensive line. You can't pay 5 veterans on the offensive line. You can't have 5 first-round picks on the offensive line. You have to find somebody somewhere to outplay expectations. You got to develop them, which would be key here for Peters. Can you develop some of these guys? Can you develop a 4th-round pick? Can you develop a 5th, 6th? Can you find a guy in another team, trade, waivers, whatever it may be to get that person, maybe it's free agency, and get him to play above what we paid him for? If you can, that's huge. And if that's his expertise, great. I'm for it. I'm for trying something different here. I think it's an inspired hire, if from my perspective, for the Bengals, to go get somebody that is new with all of this, that is trying something new, that is trying to push the position forward, that is trying to teach things that not everyone is teaching. And he believes in it, clearly. He created a whole business surrounded by it. You see around the league when tight ends go to tight end university, or linemen go see Duke Manyweather, or defensive linemen go see like a Deion pass rush coach. It's happening all around the league. These specialized coaches are very valuable, and largely they're not employed by teams. Teams may like them, may use them, they may encourage their players to go there, but rarely are they employed by a team. It's tough to break into that. You better be really impressive to break into that. And Peters did with Callahan, and now has stayed within league circles and spoken highly of. That's big. So I know that year with the Patriots, not ideal. There's enough reasons why you could be excited about this move and why you could see it working out and why you can see it fitting for what the Bengals do, because they have to go cheap and value and find value players on the offensive line. They have to. It's not even a criticism of the organization. We can criticize them all day long. But the truth is, they are going to have to find values and get them to outperform that on the offensive line. Two ways to do that. Have a great scheme where you can plug guys in and get them to work together, or teach them the technique and get them elevated and get them to play beyond what the projection was. And if that's what Scott Peters does, great, let's do it. Now, if I can go to the negative again, and thinking of both sides of the coin here, the thing I don't know that I like is all the connections. Are we only just hiring guys we know? We don't know who the defensive coordinator is. Signs pointing towards Al Golden. I'm recording this before the championship game, before the news. Maybe it's already happened. If it is, we'll catch up on Friday. But that's someone you know, right? So now you've got another Callahan disciple. So was Frank Pollack. You hired Brian Callahan. Zac Taylor was under Bill Callahan at Nebraska. Jim McNally linked the two together, Scott Peters and Callahan. Jim McNally, longtime Bengals O-line coach, that's still may have had some influence within the organization. Are we just going through the ones we know, or are we trying to find the best people that can potentially fit and elevate us as an organization? We'll talk about elevating. Do we want to bring in outside guys that may elevate us? Or are we picking guys we're comfortable with? Picking guys we know will fit what we do. It's a criticism of the organization, and it's fair to do. They have a history of things like this, which is a larger conversation. I don't know if we want to get into it right now. Maybe we do. But think about that. If you are picking one of my best friends, if not my best friend, is a Cowboys fan. And it's funny, the Cowboys are like the bizarro Bengals. And we have this conversation all the time. We just had it today when we saw each other. They're like the bizarro Bengals because they have all this money, but yet they act very similarly. Their owner is the GM. And he's kind of stingy with his money. Jerry is, if you didn't know, Jerry doesn't like to spend a lot of money. He doesn't like to bring in a lot of outside free agents. Only likes to hire coaches that he knows. And it's because the Cowboys run differently. Because if you're going to be hired as the Cowboys head coach, you got to expect the dog and pony show. You got to expect that things are a little bit differently in Dallas. Same can be said about the Bengals. And maybe not because it's some spectacle, but because you better be ready to scout. You better be ready to not get all your free agents back, the guys you want. You better be ready for them to not spend the money on a free agent you may want in the draft. You got to be ready for, even if you like this player in the draft, you may not get him because somebody may override you from ownership. So are you comfortable with that? Because we got a job for you if you are. Well, that stinks. And I don't like the idea of that. And I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just saying there's a lot of connections here to where you might say they hired a guy they knew through somebody they knew. And that's how it works. So that's life. That's a lot of jobs out there. That's the NFL. It happens all the time. So, while I'm criticizing it, that's how it goes. Doesn't make it right, though. And it's not like when you go for a head coach hire or a coordinator hire, and we'll talk about that, leaning into Al Golden. But when you get an O-line hire, you typically don't hear about the guys they interview and the guys they're interested in and how that process goes. You just find out they hired somebody by a team release because no one's really covering it and digging and trying to figure it out. So this move happens, and that's it. And we move on. They also hired an assistant O-line coach, Mike McCarthy, who was not that Mike McCarthy of the Cowboys, to keep finding connections. This is a different guy. Coached O-line with Brown University and went to the Patriots to be Peter's assistant offensive line coach. So he will follow him to Cincinnati. So two offensive line coach. They did have an assistant last year, but he is now gone and removed from the roster. So this is a 1-for-1 replacement. I don't have much to say about him, but I'm thinking overall on offense and offensive line. I have one more concern, if I may. Are we now, because he's a Bill Callahan disciple, are we now again stuck with a wide zone running coach that doesn't fit what the Bengals are doing? And we've done film reviews, so if you're not sure, wide zone is usually under center, and we're running out wide, and it's a different scheme than gap or man or power type schemes where you have hit the A gap, right? Or the 1, 2, 3 hole. Zone is more, we're going to go wide, read that guy, cut up that way. And I've diagrammed this stuff before. But the differences are you don't run a lot of wide zone out of shotgun. You really can't. You can do some pistol and maybe, but it doesn't really work that way. You run inside zone out of shotgun. You run a lot of gap and power stuff out of shotgun. So the Bengals square peg round hole type thing, is that happening again? Or is Peters like, no, I can run anything. Not only can I elevate players and get them to learn new techniques and push them forward that way, I can run this stuff. Maybe he sold them on it. But he's also not getting the run game coordinator title. And even without the title, a lot of offensive line coaches in the league are fully invested in the run game and pass protections, of course. That's their job. They are involved heavily. So even without the title, does that mean something? Does that mean Zac Taylor is now able to marry the two better or in his vision? Because it sounds like he and Frank Pollack did not see eye to eye. I don't know if I'm breaking any news there. Clearly, when it looks as just disjointed as it did under that tenure, something's got to be wrong. And the Bengals, clearly, I think 2022 was like the peak of it, where they are running two offenses. They're running the spread shotgun Joe Burrow LSU offense and then going under center to run the ball. Defenses knew what you were doing by week 3. They're like, yeah, this is not going to, we're not fooling anyone. Bengals went after that 98% shotgun and got the offense back on track and made it to the AFC Championship game, losing by 3. Not to bring up old news, but doesn't sound like the marriage was great between Pollack and Taylor. So they had to make a move there. Not to rehash, I'm sure I've said that already. But maybe now Taylor can run when he needs to run. Maybe Peters is just the better fit for that. Maybe it's just about developing these players. And again, that's a good thing. Getting a guy that can break through the NFL like this. Take Willie Anderson, for example. He has tried to do this. He's tried to be a consultant for teams. And he's had like limited, I think when Paul Alexander was with the Cowboys, he was able to come help out for a little bit during camp, but never to this extent that Peters was able to break through. I think guys that are in this profession see this as a moment. Like we get guys that are breaking through from being specialized coaches outside the organization, outside the league, getting elevated and making their way through all the way to the top, I guess, as being an offensive line coach. So you may see people around the internet that are excited about it. And maybe that's because that's their profession and that they're happy to see this happen for Scott Peters. Either way, it's a new era for evaluating offensive line. We're probably going to get some interviews with him. There's a lot of stuff out there. He's got a Twitter profile you can go to and see a bunch of his old videos. He's got a YouTube page where you can see all of his old techniques and teachings. We're going to know a lot about this guy, more than a typical position coach or coordinator that typically gets hired. Go through, and it's got hours of footage and information. Go through, learn something. You may understand what's going on when you're watching film this year. You may understand the techniques he's teaching these guys and why it may look different. Well, I'm sure we're going to get the reporters eventually asking questions to Peters and getting his thoughts on players and prospects. It's a whole new thing. Everything we thought we knew for Pollack and even Jim Turner of who they liked in the draft and whatnot. Now we start fresh. We figure it out again. And hopefully we get some clues on that and stuff we can track to get an idea of it, of who he may like as we go forward. But to end this, it wraps all the way around back to Zac Taylor. Taylor, you've got to get this right. This is a huge hire. You're on notice at this point. When you have to fire the defensive staff and the O-line run game coordinator coach, you're next. There's nobody else left. You have two big hires this offseason, the defensive coordinator and the O-line coach. One is made now as of this point recording. It better be the right one. If your O-line still has issues, this will be your third offensive line coach. If your O-line still has major issues, if you still miss on draft picks on the offensive line, if you still can't marry the run game with the pass, look at playoff football right now. You better be able to run the ball. I'm not a huge run the ball guy. I enjoy running the ball. I like the physicality of it. I enjoy giving the quarterback a break, but I understand the advanced data says you score more points if you throw the ball at a high level, which the Bengals do. You still need to be able to run the ball. There's so many times where that has failed this team. And then you have to be able to protect the quarterback. We've got to protect Joe Burrow. You don't have a choice. It's why I would spend a first-round pick on an offensive lineman. Really, instead of the talent level, we don't know who either guard will be this year. But both tackles and center, you're good there. At a first-round pick at left or right guard, that talent level is elevated extremely. We have to protect Joe. No question about it. If you continue to fail at those things that I've laid out there, it's no longer on the offensive line coach. And that's squarely on Zac Taylor. So you better be right. And I hope this was your choice. Maybe it was. I have no reason to believe it wasn't. Sounds like Zac is picking the coaches he wants. Where he heard from them, how he knows them, who knows? Probably still has a relationship with Bill Callahan, I imagine. But you better be right. Because watching these teams in the divisional round, watching the Ravens-Bills, if you watch Ravens-Bills, did you at any point, maybe it's just me, tell me if I'm wrong, but at any point did you go, we could beat these teams? We've got a better quarterback than both of them. We need to get back here. We can't mess around. We've got to get back here. It's going to require moves, free agency, coaches, draft. You got to nail these. And if you do, you can be back there. But you got to nail them. So I don't know if they nailed this O-line coach or not. We don't know. I'm not a hot take artist. I'm not going to tell you, great hire, terrible hire. I'm going to lay it all out there and we can decide. Not now. We're going to have to see. How you feel right now is up to you. But I hope we would reserve final judgment to see how this plays out. But for Taylor, he has to be right now. He's got to be strong about what he believes now. Then your organization as a whole has to be correct on these hires, these re-signings, these extensions, this free agent class that comes in, and the draft class. You cannot afford to be wrong. The pressure is on for everyone. And that's fun. It's fun for me. It's fun for all of us to analyze and watch and criticize. And the big moments are fun. I want to be back in these playoffs where I'm sweating and trembling and getting hives because of the moment. I miss it. It sucked not seeing the Bengals out there. This has been Bengals on the Brain, presented by First Star Logistics. I'm your host, Joe Goodberry. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me while I just ranted one take there for about a half hour. Until next time, Hooday.
Dave Lapham here, and every day I am grateful for my experience to have played professional football. As a player, I realized self-motivation, leadership, and appreciating your teammates are key. At First Star Logistics, you can use those same attributes to create the life you want for you and your family. Build your future by working hard like I did. You'll see results both on and off the field. Call First Star Logistics today and be part of our winning team.
Opportunity knocking.